Hi, good evening, everyone. We will start the webinar in just a few minutes. Good evening, everyone. So welcome and thank you for joining our engagement summary webinar for the South Palo Alto Bikeways project. This webinar will be available in English and Spanish. If you have not already, please click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select the language you wish to hear. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the project website. So my name is Joanna Chan. I am the Senior Transportation Planner with the city. I will be facilitating and kicking off the presentation, and I would like to welcome a few others. From our consultant team, we have Steve Davis from Fair & Peers, who will be leading and presenting in English, and Ingrid Bayuz-Ahmed from Fair & Peers will be leading the presentation in Spanish. From the city, we have Sylvia Starlack, who will be available to answer questions during the Q&A sessions, and Jose Palma, who will be assisting. So this evening, we will provide an overview of the project background, potential improvements, and share with you the feedback we have received through our online survey and previous events. We will also provide the options that will likely be presented to PTC and Council in July and August. We will stop midway through our presentation to answer questions from the Q&A window. And at the end of the presentation, we'll again answer some questions from the Q&A window, but we'll mainly facilitate an open discussion through raised hands. And to ask a question in the Q&A window, click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and type in your question into the text box. We are performing simultaneous translation into Spanish, so therefore you may notice some momentary pauses between slides and questions. So it is our pleasure to have you here this evening, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. So the South Palo Alto Bikeways project was awarded to improve bicycle facilities on 3 corridors: the Waverley Bike Path, East Meadow Drive between Alma and Fabian between East Meadow and East Charleston. Here is a project map showing the project corridors in green. These corridors serve as key routes for students traveling to multiple schools, as well as connections to various community facilities, such as Mitchell Park Library and Community Center, JCC, and the Highway 101 Pedestrian Bike Bridge Project and Adobe Creek Reach Trail that is currently under construction, which you can see in orange on this map. Here are 2 charts displaying data on students bicycling to school. These are collected by counting the number of parked bikes at a school and are administered by Parent-Teacher Association volunteers. And relevant to the project, the graph on the left shows in blue that JLS students biking increased from 48% in 2009 to 70% in 2019. The graph on the right shows in red that gun students biking increased from 33% in 2009 to 50% in 2019. And for this coming school year, an 8:30 a.m. start time for JLS and 9 a.m. for gun could result in even higher rates for biking and walking, as parents' work schedules may no longer align with a morning school drop-off. So now let us take a quick look at the 3 project corridors and what they look like now. The existing Waverley multi-use path is bumpy with uneven surfaces in places due to cracking and tree root intrusion. There are also obstacles such as overgrown vegetations, as you can see in this photo. And additionally, the path is directly adjacent to a chain link fence that can interfere with bicycle handlebars. And these issues together with high demand during school peak periods have led to falls and collisions for students cycling. East Meadow Drive is a popular school commute corridor. It currently has 1 vehicle travel lane, 1 bike lane, and 1 non-standard width parking lane in each direction. The road curbs, large parked vehicles, and lack of space between the bike lane and parking lane can result in challenges for bicyclists, exposing them to dooring risk by parked cars or causing them to use the sidewalks when bike lanes are obstructed. On Fabian Way, we have heard parents indicate that the existing bicycle facility makes it a difficult school commute route. This is likely due to the large crossing distance, traffic volumes and speeds, and lack of separation from vehicle traffic. As you can see in the photo on the right, this is Fabian Way looking towards West Bayshore Road, and the shared bicycle and parking lane leaves very little room for bicyclists and presents dooring exposure. Now, I would like to turn the presentation over to Steve, who will speak in more detail about potential improvements and share a summary of feedback we've received so far.
Thanks, Joanna. So we'll begin by sharing examples of the different types of enhancements and bicycle facilities that we'll be discussing. The first set of treatments are the most common form of bike lanes, which can either be standard bike lanes like you see on the left or buffered bike lanes like you see on the right. These treatments provide a clearly delineated space for one-way bike travel on a roadway. Standard bike lanes, such as those shown on the left, are the existing condition on East Meadow and Fabian. Buffered bike lanes, such as those shown on the right, are generally the same, but provide additional striping to create clear space between bicyclists and moving vehicles. This clear space also creates additional space for bicyclists to utilize in the event that a car door is open into the bike lane from a parked vehicle. Both of these treatments are used in many locations throughout Palo Alto. The next potential treatment is a protected bike lane, sometimes referred to as cycle tracks. This provides a space for bicycles that is separated from vehicle traffic by some kind of physical barrier, such as bollards, concrete curbs, or other vertical elements. As an example, bollards are used in front of Green Middle School at Middlefield Road and North California Avenue. This essentially creates a separate right-of-way for bicyclists within the roadway to minimize interactions between vehicles and bicycles. These can be implemented quickly using materials such as plastic bollards or delineators, similar to the example on the left from Los Gatos. One specific version of protected bike lane is referred to as a parking protected bike lane and utilizes parked vehicles as part of the physical protection between the bike lane and moving vehicle traffic. This also creates a separate right-of-way for bicyclists in the roadway and still allows parking without interactions between drivers completing parking maneuvers and bicyclists. This treatment provides space between parked vehicles and the protected bike lane to avoid the vehicle door zone from the passenger side of cars intruding on bicyclists' path. As with protected bike lanes, parking protected bike lanes can be implemented more quickly using plastic bollard delineators, such as we see here along another section of Blossom Hill Road in Los Gatos. For the Waverley path, the barrier between the path and the school parking circulation could be modified to eliminate some of the constraints caused by the existing chain link fence. A shorter barrier, in particular, would not catch handlebars like the fence can, allowing bicyclists to ride closer to it and effectively making the path feel wider. A wide variety of materials can serve this purpose, including bollards, delineators, curbs, or a variety of other separators. These devices have been implemented adjacent to bike lanes or bicycle paths in various locations throughout the Bay Area, including Palo Alto and adjacent communities such as Menlo Park, Mountain View, and Redwood City. Additionally, a variety of other decorative or artistic treatments could be considered to replace or enhance the existing fence. These treatments could provide a more substantial separation between the vehicle circulation route and path, similar to the existing fence, but would improve the aesthetics. Depending on the treatment selected, the overall height may still be reduced to address interference with cyclists' handlebars. Some treatments, such as the decorated bollards and guardrails shown at the right, can also be implemented and adjusted more quickly. Okay, so with that background in mind, let's jump into the overall summary of the engagement activities and the feedback received to date. The table on this slide summarizes the engagement methods for the project, including launching of the project webpage, communication through the city's social media channels, physical distribution of materials, focus meetings, and other methods used to advertise the project engagement. Additionally, the table shown here shows the online survey and various events that were conducted, along with the level of participation observed to date for each type of engagement. A goal of this first phase of engagement was to assess community support for protected bicycle facilities. There were considerations that may have impacted the evaluation of the project. For example, we had to rely on digital engagement tools, which had low participation. The engagement timeframe limited school-based opportunities because it was at the end of the school year. However, parent participation in the online survey seems to have been fairly robust. Overall, given the constrained project timeline and pandemic situation, there were limited resources and ability to pivot. So the slide here identifies a few of the key pieces of feedback received for each of the project corridors during the webinars. Two key themes that developed were concerns about parking reduction, as well as concern about visibility for cyclists if parking protected bike lanes were implemented on East Meadow or Fabian Way. Participants sought more information pertaining to the makeup of people using the project corridors and noted that biking is particularly difficult at school arrival and dismissal times along East Meadow. For the Waverley path, many attendees expressed a preference for keeping rigid delineation between the path and adjacent vehicle circulation to encourage safer behavior, with a lower fence seen as a desirable option. Participants generally agreed with the project's goal to avoid tree removals along the path. As you can see here, a total of 258 unique participants provided feedback via the project's online survey. 95% of those who participated live in Palo Alto, and the responses indicated that approximately 80% of those who completed the survey were familiar with the corridors as a bicyclist and/or driver. Approximately 2/3 of the participants represented households with a student under the age of 18 who bikes to and from school. The next few slides speak directly to feedback provided for each of the project corridors using the Webmap, which was accessible through the online survey. A total of 11 comments were placed along Fabian Way using the Webmap, with more than half indicating that a protected bikeway was needed. No respondents indicated that existing bikeways were adequate. Written comments indicated that biking is difficult and feels unsafe here, especially for children, and expressed concern for movement at the Fabian and East Charleston intersection. A total of 50 comments were placed along East Meadow Drive using the Webmap. 13 comments indicated a preference for protected or buffered bikeways, all of which were placed between Alma Street and Middlefield Road. 22 comments were placed indicating that the existing bikeways were adequate. Written comments indicated that there were concerns about placement of bollards, in some cases noting specific locations in the concept where bollards wouldn't be feasible for bikeway protection. It was noted that biking is particularly difficult during school arrival and dismissal times, and that East Meadow is used heavily as a biking route by Gunn High School students. Finally, a total of 17 comments were received on the Waverley Path via the project Webmap, with 12 of those expressing a desire for the path to be widened. Respondents expressed a desire to maintain some kind of continuous physical barrier between the path and the adjacent vehicle circulation out of concern for safe interactions between students biking and drivers. Several participants noted that wayfinding and connectivity between the path and nearby facilities such as Mitchell Park and the existing bikeways on East Charleston Road could be improved. As part of the survey, participants were directly asked to vote for their preferred option on each project corridor. 2 options were provided for each location, and participants were additionally could choose to express no preference or select other and enter written explanations. For Fabian Way, option 1 consisted of eliminating the existing on-street parking to allow 4 vehicle lanes to be maintained while adding buffers for the existing bike lanes. Option 2 consisted of maintaining on-street parking, adding a center turn lane, and implementing protected bike lanes while removing 1 through travel lane in each direction. As can be seen here, 58% of the survey participants indicated a preference for protected bike lanes along Fabian Way, while 26% preferred buffered bike lanes. A total of 16% either didn't express a preference or indicated a preference for a different option, with those who preferred to maintain the existing condition on Fabian Way representing 3.5% of the responses. On East Meadow Drive, both options to improve the existing bikeway require removing parking on one side of the street. The parking retained could be on either side of the street and could potentially be different in different segments. Option 1 generally consisted of providing buffered bike lanes on both sides of the street to improve visibility and separation of bicyclists. Parking would be retained between the bike lane and sidewalk on one side of the street. Option 2 consisted of providing protected bike lanes on both sides of the street. In this option, parking would be between moving vehicles and bikeways to provide additional separation. On East Meadow, 53% of the survey participants indicated a preference for protected bike lanes, while 24% preferred buffered bike lanes. A total of 23% either didn't express preference or indicated a preference for a different option, with those who preferred to maintain the existing condition on Fabian Way representing 9% of the responses. Consistent with the feedback received during the engagement events, several responses reflected a desire to better understand how parking would be affected prior to selecting an alternative. For the Waverley multi-use path, the two options propose different approaches to modifying the path to provide an improved and more consistent user experience. Option 1 consisted of widening the path toward the grassy strip away from the school buildings where feasible to accommodate larger flows. At pinch points like the fire hydrant shown here on the left, widening the path would allow more space for bicyclists. Option 2 consisted of not only widening the path toward the grassy strip similar to option 1, but additionally widening the path towards the school buildings where feasible to allow additional space adjacent to trees and vegetation. Any modifications of the path would require coordination with the fire department and the school district. Both options were noted to potentially include removal or modification of the existing chain link fence and replace it with a different type of separation. As previously mentioned, a wide variety of materials could be used to delineate the separation between the Waverley path and the adjacent vehicle circulation. As seen here, approximately 2/3 of the survey participants expressed support for option 2, which would include widening the path on either side where feasible. As part of the survey, participants were directly asked to indicate on which sections of East Meadow Drive and Fabian Way they would prefer to see protected bikeways. Participants were allowed to select more than one segment and could select all segments if desired. As can be seen here, support for protected bikeways was strongest on East Meadow Drive between Alma Street and Middlefield Road, as well as on Fabian Way. Respondents generally showed less preference for protected bikeways on East Meadow Drive north of Middlefield Road. We're going to stop here for about 10 minutes to answer questions in the Q&A window.
Thank you, Steve. So before we jump into questions, we would like to get a better understanding of participants listening in Spanish. So if you are listening in Spanish, could you please raise your hand at this time? You can click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on the phone, please press *9. Okay, thank you. So let me see what questions we have here. So if you have a question right now, please do type in the Q&A window. So the Q&A icon is at the bottom. So if you have a question, please type in the text box, and we'll give participants a few minutes here. So again, we are performing simultaneous translation into Spanish. So you may notice momentary pauses between questions. I do see Arthur, you do have a raised hand. Is this for a question? Please unmute yourself if it is for a question. We are taking only Q&A from the Q&A window right now, but you do have a raised hand. I want to make sure we take a question or comment that you have.
Yes, my question regards the section of East Meadow that crosses Fabian, that meets at Fabian. That is part of East Meadow, and that is part of the attachment to the bike bridge. What will the treatment be on that location? Because half of that location is in front of apartments, and half of it is in front of the buildings on Fabian.
So Arthur, is it okay if we leave this question again to be answered in the end? Because we are doing simultaneous translation right now. So in order to have Ingrid translate for us, we have to take the bulk of the raised hand questions at the end for easier translation.
Sure. Okay,
thank you. And I'm assuming, Alice, you also have a question. And if you could we take verbal questions in the end, but you can definitely type in your question right now at the Q&A window at the bottom if you'd still like to ask a question.
I'm also going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, since I see there's some comments about it not being full screen, and see if I can get it to share correctly, because I don't know. It's showing up right on my end, but I want to see if I can fix it.
Okay, so we have one question right now. So the question is, can more than one bike ride side by side in a protected or separated bike lane? On a Rastradero, it is not possible to safely pass another bike.
Joanna, do you want me to?
Yes, Sylvia or Steve, yeah.
So it depends on how wide the bike lane is. So so it also depends a little bit on what is the protection that is provided. So I know that on a Rastradero, there are places where it's a continuous curb on both sides of the bike lane, and that may feel tight and not, that you might feel like you can't pass anyone. If we were to choose bollards or some other divider, there might actually be more space, and it might be easier. So that's how I would answer it. I don't know, Steve, if you have another answer.
That's right. And in general, from a design perspective, 6 feet is considered the width that would allow passing from 2 parallel bicyclists, which is the minimum width that we are proposing here. And then, as Sylvia noted, depending on the treatment between what the physical protection is, there can actually be more physical space available adjacent to bollards or whatever.
We're just giving Ingrid some time for the translation. Okay, thank you. So seeing no hands as of now, Steve will hand the presentation back to you.
All right, once it lets me unmute. Okay, so we'll jump back in then. Based upon the feedback received through the events, survey, Webmap, and emails to the Office of Transportation, we have developed a preferred alternative for consideration. Given the support for protected bikeways on Fabian Way, we plan to present to PTC and Council option 2, which includes a reduction in travel lanes and maintains on-street parking as part of a parking protected bikeway in the eastbound direction headed towards US 101. Improvements for this segment would be coordinated with other improvements programmed as part of the Charleston Arrastradero project, including lane configurations at the East Charleston Road intersection. Before we share the preferred alternative for East Meadow Drive, we would like to note that a number of concerns related to improvements on East Meadow were identified through the engagement process. Specifically, there were concerns that the survey did not explicitly provide an option to retain existing conditions, which supports an overall community preference to preserve parking as much as possible on the residential sides. With that in mind, survey responses indicated general support for protected bikeways on East Meadow south of Middlefield Road, with the greatest desire to add protected facilities adjacent to the schools between Waverley Street and Middlefield Road. Given that East Meadow Drive is not wide enough to allow addition of buffers or protection for bike lanes while keeping parking on both sides of the street, the preferred alternative reflects a solution with parking preserved on the residential side of the street. Based upon the feedback, East Meadow Drive has been broken into 4 different segments for the identification of the preferred alternatives. Location number 1 is between East Meadow Circle and Fabian Way and would retain parking in the westbound direction traveling away from Fabian Way while keeping bike lanes on both sides. Location number 2 is on the other end of East Meadow Drive between Alma Street and Waverley Street. Compared to the rest of the corridor, relatively few properties have driveways directly accessing East Meadow, as most properties front cross streets. Because of this, a preferred design of protected bike lanes in both directions with parking maintained on one side has been identified. Access to all driveways would be maintained. Location number 3 is between Waverley Street and Middlefield Road including the frontage of JLS and Fairmeadow schools, as well as Mitchell Park on the south side of the street. Along this section, a majority of the north side of the street consists of residential frontage. Because of this context, a preferred design was identified as a hybrid of the original two options. On the residential side of the street, a buffered bike lane would be introduced in the westbound direction, while the on-street parking lane would be widened between the bike lane and sidewalk. The buffer would increase bicyclist comfort and provide additional space to navigate the door zone. Alternatives to provide a buffer between bicyclists and parked vehicles could also be considered. On the school side of the street, a protected bikeway would be provided by including physical separation in the proposed painted buffer. Access to all existing driveways would be maintained. One unique location in this segment is where angled parking is provided with direct access from East Meadow Drive, adjacent to Fairmeadow Elementary School. The same general cross-section as described in the last slide would be maintained here, but the bike lane would be striped with dash markings to identify the mixing zone between bicycles and vehicles completing parking maneuvers. This is similar to the existing treatment on Stanford Avenue at the dish parking. The final segment of East Meadow Drive is between Middlefield Road and East Meadow Circle, where both sides of the street are generally fronted by residential properties. Based upon the feedback received, the preferred design here consists of buffered bike lanes in both directions. On-street parking would be maintained between the bike lane and sidewalk in one direction, currently proposed to be in the westbound direction. At locations where there are no driveways and parking is not proposed, such as adjacent to Ramos Park, physical separators such as bollards could be added to the buffered bike lane to enhance protection of bicyclists. Finally, based upon the feedback, the preferred alternative for Waverley Path was identified as widening to either side of the path where feasible. The design has the potential to provide the greatest enhancement to the user's experience while minimizing the effect on trees. Based on the feedback, it is anticipated that a continuous, rigid barrier would be investigated to replace the existing chain link fence in order to best control interactions between students on the path and vehicles in the adjacent circulation aisles. As previously mentioned, any winding toward the school would be coordinated with the school district and the fire department. So with that, now I'm now going to turn it back over to Joanna to explain the next steps for the project before we take additional questions.
Sorry, thank you, Steve. So could you go to the next slide, Steve? Thanks. So we will incorporate any additional comments received this evening into our staff report to the Planning and Transportation Commission and City Council. And we do anticipate presenting to PTC on July the 14th, followed by City Council on August the 9th. If City Council directs the project to move forward, the design phase will likely begin in the fall, which will include more community engagement, parking studies, and temporary treatments. And now, so we will turn back to the Q&A window and answer any more questions. And then we will invite you to raise your hand and tell us any additional thoughts you may have. So give me 1 second. So the question is, what is proposed for East Meadow at Fabian? The first part of that is by condos. Then there is the entry to the bike bridge. Then there are 2 office buildings on the corner. Steve, I'm not sure, could you navigate back to the East Meadow, I think it's location number 1 slide?
I will reshare in a second. Hang on.
Yep, no problem.
There you go. So I can take that at the high level. What is generally proposed on East Fabian is something that would enhance the delineation for the bicyclists in both directions there and reinforce the bicycle lanes, but still maintain parking, as parking was observed to be in generally high demand, especially adjacent to the condos you were describing. So by and large, the understanding there was that protection for the bicycles wouldn't probably be feasible because this is the narrowest bicycle, or the narrowest cross section that we have of the project corridors.
Okay, the question after that is, which side of the street on Fabian gets the parking, or does it go back and forth, or to be determined?
Sure, I can take that one. So Fabian currently only has parking on one side of the street. It has parking on the south or JCC side of the street, and it would, well, it would retain parking on that side of the street for the protected bikeway option.
Okay, another question. So Steve, if you could pull Fabian Way back up. So please show the slide for Fabian Way. I'm curious what considerations were given. This is the entrance to the path and to the new bridge. I think this is a similar question that we just answered about what is proposed at East Meadow and Fabian. I'm not sure if Sylvia, if you had other additional thoughts about the connection to the entrance or to the new bridge.
So, so Fabian itself, so I'm a little, so you could get to the bridge by taking Fabian and crossing over, by taking Fabian, staying on, and then Fabian becomes West Bayshore, and then crossing over to the bridge that way. That's one way of getting to the new bridge. The other way would be to take Fabian, make a left onto East Meadow, as you see here on the map, right by the Y in the word way. You make a left onto the green route, which is East Meadow, and there's actually going to be a new reach trail connection there along the bank of the creek. So our project will not address the West Bayshore connection, but our project does run right in front of, there's already a curb cut there, there's already a driveway to get into the reach trail. And right now, I think if you already showed the curb cut for East Meadow for that. I'm sorry, not the curb cut, the cross section. Yeah, that is what would occur. And there's the plan version of what would occur along adjacent to where the bridge entrance is, the new creek trail.
So the next question is, which side of East Meadow has the parking?
So the north side, Steve, I don't know if you want to take this. I think we are taking input on what people want to see based on the input that we've received. It looks like the north side would retain the parking and the south side would not have parking.
Yeah, that's right. So the way it is shown right now is that in general, the north side, which would be the westbound direction going away from 101 towards Caltrain, for most of the corridor would be the direction that retains parking, as that is the side that has the greatest amount of residential parking in most areas. So the desire was understood to retain parking in front of people's homes where possible. The segment between Waverley and Alma Street currently shows it in the other direction, in the eastbound direction, though that could be moved to the other side as well. So it can only be provided on one side, but it could realistically be in either direction between Alma Street and Waverley Street, given the geometries and the fact that the frontage is about the same on both sides.
Okay, oh, sorry. We're just giving Ingrid some time for translation here. Okay, I will just do 3 to 4 more questions from the Q&A window, and I will open up for raised hands. So the next question, so will the East Meadow Drive bike lanes coordinate with the separated rail crossing at Alma? The plans for separating East Meadow don't seem to adequately take bike crossing into account. Sylvia, is that something you could take?
Yeah, so this project will extend just to Alma, East Meadow at Alma. It won't cross over Alma. And this project, because of the tight grant timeline, will have to be starting construction in the year 2023. So this project will be here first, and the grade separations will have to coordinate with this project. So that's a separate project, and we'll address that as decisions are made about the grade separation, but that's a separate project.
Next question is, was any thought given to Meadow and Bryant for better connection between these routes? For example, a crosswalk, pulling back parking and adding a left turn pocket for bikes. Also, how will left turns work from a parking protected bike lane?
Okay, so that's 2 questions. So I'll start with the Meadow Bryant. So this project is not going to address the crossing of Meadow at Bryant. That will be addressed by a different project, the Bryant Street Bike Boulevard extension that is part of our Bike Boulevards project. This grant doesn't have enough money in it to do that intersection justice. So that's the answer to that. How will left turns work from a parking protected lane? I don't know, Steve, if you want to say anything about that.
Sure.
Yeah, okay,
So,
go ahead.
There's a couple of ways that can be made. In the design, since we have relatively short sections of parking protected bikeway, and in each case it only applies to one side of the street, the approach is generally to provide enough opening before intersections and enough mixing zone that cyclists would have the opportunity to make lefts in the typical fashion they would from a standard bike lane. And depending on bicyclist comfort, that could either be taking the lane and using, hand signals to make a standard left turn as they would from a vehicular travel lane, from like a standard bikeway, or for bicyclists who are so inclined, some cases they would make more of a two-stage left turn where they go through the intersection, kind of go to the far side and then cross, similar to what a pedestrian would do to cross, or cross like they're crossing traffic. So that would be one option. In the case of people traveling specifically to a driveway as opposed to an intersection where the opening may not be directly aligned, that usually would be facilitated either by the cyclist moving into the travel lane in advance of the intersection, if they're comfortable doing so, and doing the same thing as I described just now as the first maneuver. The second option would be, given the shorter block length and the distance between openings, would be someone overshooting the driveway they're attempting to turn into by generally 100 feet or so, but by the distance up to the next intersection or driveway, crossing as they would there, and then traveling a short distance back down the bikeway in the other direction.
Oh, okay. So next question is, was street parking considered near Ramos Park or Mitchell Park?
So that's a good question. Street, you mean parking? I'm assuming this question is about parking for users of those streets, of those parks. So yes, we have considered it. Based on the feedback that we heard, that we wanted to retain parking for the most residents, the protected or the parking lane to be removed would have to be on the south side where the parks are located. Right now, people park on both sides of East Meadow to reach the parks, and they cross the street to get there. And so there's still parking available. It just wouldn't be right at the curb. And we would propose to protect the bike lanes there at the parks, at the school and at Mitchell Park, and also at Ramos Park, to prevent parking incursion actually into those spaces, just to make sure that those bike lanes didn't become de facto parking lanes.
So this will be, let me see. Oh, sorry, let me give Ingrid some more time to translate.
Oh, sorry. Can I add one more thing? Mitchell Park has its own parking lot. Sorry, I meant to say that.
Okay, so we will take our last Q&A question here, and after that, we will invite you to raise your hand if your questions have not been answered or if you have additional questions and or comments. So the question is, was there any mention of tree removal along Waverley? Seems like the redwood in the picture might need to go. And I can take the question. So so we are definitely carefully navigating that conversations and what could and could not be done around the Waverley bike path. And for those, and maybe all of you have been on there, there are trees on one side and a few fire hydrants on the other side. So there are definitely pinch points and constraints. A goal of this project is to not remove trees as much as possible, but we are still having conversations with our arborists, PAUSD, fire hydrants, our engineers, and we're trying to figure out ways to preserve as many trees as we can. So with that, if we have not answered your question, please do raise your hand and we will unmute you and call on your name to ask your question. I see, oh, Arthur?
Yes, I would say that the what will happen at the intersection of East Meadow and Middlefield.
So East Meadow and Middlefield, we are not proposing changes to that intersection at this point. Correct me if I'm wrong, Steve. I don't think we've done that. Yeah.
There's probably enough space to add a small buffer between bikeway and vehicle lanes, but by and large, because there is the additional travel lane for the turn lanes at the intersection, there isn't space for a much larger buffer or for physical protection. And we also want to be mindful of the interactions. There's enough vehicle turning volume there that right hook would become a bigger concern if you introduce physical protection up to the intersection there without a broader redesign that wouldn't really fit within the scope of this project.
What will be done to prevent people from stopping to let kids on and off while driving eastbound in front of the two schools and blocking traffic?
I mean, they're doing that now. I mean, double parking is a thing that happens. But we would work with our school communities, as we always do, and with our Safe Routes to School staff to communicate with the school communities to basically, let them, I mean, they're obviously going to know something's different. And so we would be messaging with them about what the new protocols would be for drop off. Mitchell Park remains an available drop off space, which is one of the reasons why we feel comfortable recommending the removal of the parking lane on the school side. The schools all have drop off areas. Mitchell Park is available. So, there are options, there's still plenty of options for people to drop off, and people could drop off. Yeah, so that's all I want to say.
And people dropping off kids on the other side of the street, what's to prevent them from jaywalking across the street?
I mean, it's the same as today, Arthur. Like, that's what kids are doing. Parents are dropping off on the other side of the street and kids are running across. This is a communications challenge for us and our school partners. Every school handbook has education on how, it has information on how parents are asked to approach the school. And these school handbooks, I believe, also talk about how walking and biking are the preferred methods for students to get to school. So, we are always in a continuous conversation with our schools on safe arrival and dismissal protocols.
on in between Waverley and Alma? Are you proposing that we be on the south side or the north side of the street for parking? It means for consistency, it seems that you should keep it on the same side of the street.
I think Steve, you said that it's right now being proposed in the eastbound, so the parking would be on the south.
Yeah, right now it's shown on the south. The one consideration that partly would lead towards that is the angle of the intersection through Waverley. Because there's the bend in the road there, it actually is slightly better from the geometric standpoint to not have the vehicles already hugging the inside of the curb there, to have them on the south side. Having them slightly offset to the north makes it a more straight movement through that intersection, which when looking at the geometry, made it appear that it would be slightly less likely for vehicles to accidentally intrude on the parallel bikeways since space is constrained. But in the broader sense, otherwise, either side could be considered.
Mhm.
Half that length has no entry to apartment, have no entry to houses. Half of the length between Waverley and Alma has no entry to houses.
Yep, we understand. There's only a handful of driveways on that segment.
One thing I want to say, just getting back to Arthur's other question, and we should probably move on to some other folks who raised their hands, is that once how I think about the cross section in front of the schools is that we're right sizing the parking lanes there. Right now, our parking lanes are not of standard width. And so anytime anyone opens a car door on East Meadow, you're blocking a bike lane. And so when we remove the parking lane, on the school side, we're actually able to resize the parking lane on the north side so that there's less risk to students if someone is parking and dropping off someone. So I just want to, and we'll be resizing the bike lanes as well. So we're going to be right sizing the street for the travel that's happening on it.
Thank you.
You're muted, Joanna.
I just want to say thank you, Arthur. Alice?
Hi, I have two questions. One is, what is the time frame for the separate project that adds a westbound left turn lane at JLS? Because we have a lot of people circling around that left turner and getting into what would be the bike lanes. And so I think those coordination of those two projects are pretty critical.
Yeah, so we don't have a timeline. If depending on how this project works out, if we have money available in our budget, we would like to include it into this if possible. But if not, then we're going to have to find the money before we can do the project. But we would like to, yeah, absolutely.
It's a safety issue, I think, and people, or else we put an officer there to ticket everybody who does that. It doesn't turn right.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The other question I had was related to the access to the bike overpass. It looked to me like the parking was on the north side, which is also where people are going to be crossing to go to that bikeway. So it seemed like it ought to be on the south or the western side rather than the northeastern side. Maybe I'm not looking at it correctly. I just wanted to raise that question.
So it turns out that the actual access will not have parking in front of it. I mean, there will be there's a very wide driveway, since the Valley Water maintenance trucks have to be able to get up onto the path that we're all going to be using to walk and bike to the bridge on. So there's not going to be, yes, there's parking on that side of the street, but there will be, it'll be a wide curb cut there. Are you concerned about visibility of people crossing from that side?
Yes, I just thought maybe if you had a choice, why not look at the southwestern side? If you're only going to do one side anyway, I think the idea of doing one side is a good idea. Same thing on Fabian Way, but it just seemed like it was one more barrier for visibility.
Okay, I mean, it's interesting because if you have the parking across from the trail, then now you have a bunch of people crossing the street, right? Like,
Yes,
on the one hand, you might want to keep people on the trail side so they're not having to get into traffic to access the trail. So, but I hear your point that either way, we could put the parking on either side.
right.
And
Okay,
your preference is to put it opposite the trail.
yes.
Okay.
So
Thank
that
you.
the visibility for the trail, I mean, it's a lovely area. It's going to be just marvelous when it's done.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Richard?
Yes, not Richard, wife of Richard, but I'm curious why, when you said there was overwhelming support to preserve parking in residential areas, you're proposing eliminating 50% of the parking on East Meadow Drive between Middlefield and East Meadow Circle. It's presently heavily parked on both sides, especially when there are activities at Ramos. I don't see how it can support losing 50%.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. This has to do with the requirements of the grant that that this project is being funded by. We were actually tasked with coming up with protected bikeways for both East Meadow and Fabian Way. And if we can't do fully protected bikeways, then we're trying to add buffered bike lanes here. In either case, in order to get those, there's not enough room. So we would have to we have to remove parking somewhere in order to make this work. And as we said before, we wanted to keep parking on the side where there were the most houses, and just because where the parks are, that's how that. But we could.
Why can't you just in this section from like Ross to East Meadow Circle, just leave it the way it is? I mean, there's lots of room there. It's a wider street than a lot of the rest of it.
The cars have to go be parked somewhere. I think you should take a look, as my husband just said, between particularly Ross and East Meadow Circle, where the car is going to go. There, it's full again and again.
So yeah, as I said, this has to do with the grant requirements, and that is, we may not keep our funding if that's what we offer up to VTA. So that's
okay.
Yeah, we're kind of
okay.
stuck.
Okay, so here's a question that so to make sure that part doesn't happen, we need to go to the city council and say kill the whole thing.
That is one option, right? We are going to, that is an option, is we could, when we go to council, we will be asking them if they want to move forward, given what we have heard from the community and what VTA is asking of us.
Is there any other option then, besides killing the whole project? Because I think there's a lot of good in the project, but I just don't think that section is really being looked at with what the amount of people who live there and the amount of cars there are.
And the actual bike traffic.
Well, there's the actual bike traffic, and then there's the future bike traffic, right? Now that the bridge will be opening, and that's
Yeah, I know. When the underpass was there, we lived here for 30 years. We know what bike traffic is.
Yeah,
we're part of the bike traffic.
Yeah.
But anyway, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I understand your frustration, and that's the nature of the grant that we have.
So thank you, Richard and wife. If you have other questions, we would like to invite you to raise your hand. I don't see any right now. So I'll let you guys think for another 30 seconds. We do have 20 more minutes. So if you do not have any more questions, okay, I see a hand. Arthur.
Yes, apropos of the last question, what happens if we propose excellent bike additions for East Meadow elsewhere and leave that second section alone of East Meadow? So we propose Fabian, we propose across from the Waverley Trail, we propose East Meadow west of Middlefield, we propose East Meadow Circle, the little section of East Meadow Circle, but we won't propose East Meadow from Middlefield to East Meadow Circle. Will that fly?
I don't know. We can ask, but we've asked. We can ask again, I guess is what I should say. We've asked, and we were told that we needed to bring in, we need to try to get a project in that has as much protection, and or separation as possible. So that at a certain point, if we don't give them enough, then they will yank the grant. So.
Sorry. So thanks, Arthur. I see Richard and wife's hand up again.
I was,
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Could you try unmuting again?
I just wanted to echo Arthur's question because that was pretty much what I was asking. I would like to believe that when the council or whoever's got this money coming to you hears that there is overwhelming support to maintain parking in residential areas, that they would be flexible as to where they add the barriers and the protection and whatever versus getting rid of all the parking. So I think it's worth asking the question again because the community response was retain parking.
You're muted.
Sorry, I keep not unmuting myself. Thank you. Alice?
Sorry, I just have one other question as to whether there is no parking like Mitchell Park has at Ramos Park, and it's always been a deficit for Ramos. Is that another alternative that could be proposed? I don't even know what the logistics are. There's an open field there, but to provide some additional parking for that particular park was one thought I had related to the previous conversation. Otherwise, I think going to bat for what has been said is worth doing.
That's an interesting idea. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. To we can ask parks if we're not the parks people, so we can talk to parks and see if they would entertain that.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Are there any more questions at this time? So if there are no more questions, we could bring this webinar today to an end and return 15 minutes of your evening to you. So for the most updated information, you can visit our project webpage. If Steve, you can bring up our information page.
Sorry, you would think this would be easier.
No problem. So yeah, so our project webpage is at the bottom right-hand corner, which is cityofpaloalto.org/bikeways. And if you have any additional questions that we didn't cover, you can always reach out to the Office of Transportation at transportation@cityofpaloalto.org, and make sure to put the subject line South Palo Alto Bikeways Project. So once again, thank you for spending this evening with us, and have a good rest of your evening.